Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome to a peaceful journey through time. Tonight, we'll drift back to the rolling green hills of England, to a time when apple orchards swayed gently in country breezes, and the world still held countless mysteries waiting to be discovered. Let yourself sink deeper into your pillows as we explore the quiet, contemplative life of perhaps history's most brilliant mind. Take a deep breath now and allow the tensions of your day to melt away like morning mist over an English meadow. We're going to visit Isaac Newton, not as the stern figure from textbooks, but as a curious child, a thoughtful young man, and ultimately a gentle soul who unlocked the secrets of the universe while living quietly in the countryside he loved. So close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and join me as we wander through the seasons of Newton's remarkable life, where each discovery was born from patient observation and quiet wonder. Chapter 1. A Small Flame in Winter's Dark. On a cold Christmas morning in the year 1642, as snow fell softly over the limestone cottages of Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth, a tiny flame of life flickered into existence. Isaac Newton entered this world so small, so fragile, that his mother Hannah could have cradled him entirely in a quart pot. The winter wind whistled through the bare branches of the apple trees outside, but inside the modest manor house, a miracle was taking place. Hannah Newton, barely 20 years old and recently widowed, held her impossibly small son close to her heart. The local women who had come to help whispered among themselves, shaking their heads sadly. Babies born this early, this small, rarely survived the harsh winter months. But something in little Isaac's steady breathing, in the determined way his tiny fingers curled around his mother's thumb, suggested that this child possessed an unusual strength. The first years of Isaac's life passed gently in the peaceful rhythm of country living. His mother would carry him through the rooms of Woolsthorpe Manor, past the old oak beams and stone walls that had sheltered generations before them. She would show him the frost patterns on the windows in winter mornings, teaching him to trace the delicate ice crystals with his tiny finger. In spring, she would walk with him through the apple orchard, letting him touch the soft pink blossoms and watch the bees going about their ancient work. Even as a very young child, Isaac displayed an unusual quality of attention. While other children might run and shout at play, little Isaac would sit perfectly still for long minutes, watching a spider spin its web or observing how water droplets formed on morning leaves. Hannah noticed how her son's dark eyes would follow the movement of clouds across the sky, as if he were reading some secret message written in their shadows. In the evenings, as the sun set behind the hills of Lincolnshire, Hannah would sit with Isaac by the fire and read to him from the family Bible. Her voice, soft and melodious, would fill the quiet room as she told him stories of creation, of stars and planets moving in their courses, of a world created with divine order and purpose. Isaac would listen with rapt attention, his small head resting against his mother's shoulder, absorbing these first seeds of wonder about the magnificent design of the universe. When Isaac was 3 years old, his world changed quietly but profoundly. His mother married Barnabas Smith, a wealthy rector from nearby North Witham. The arrangement was practical. Hannah needed security, and Reverend Smith needed a wife to manage his household. But there was one condition that would shape the rest of Isaac's childhood. The Reverend would not have another man's child in his house. And so, on a gray morning, when the apple trees were just beginning to bud, Hannah kissed her little son goodbye and walked away down the lane, leaving him in the care of his grandmother.
Chapter 2. Grandmother's Garden and Quiet Lessons. Marjorie Ayscough, Isaac's maternal grandmother, was a woman of quiet wisdom and infinite patience. Her cottage, connected to the main manor, became Isaac's entire world for the next 8 years. She moved slowly now, her joints stiff with age, but her mind remained sharp as a needle. Each morning, she would wake young Isaac with gentle words and lead him to the kitchen garden, where she grew the herbs and vegetables that sustained them through the seasons. "See here, child," Grandmother Marjorie would say, her weathered hands showing Isaac how to plant beans in straight rows. "Everything has its season, its proper time and place. The earth knows when to wake up in spring, when to rest in winter. If you watch carefully, you'll learn the earth's own clock." Isaac absorbed these lessons with the same intense focus he brought to everything, filing away observations about how plants turned toward the sun, how water moved through soil, how the seasons cycled with mathematical precision. Grandmother Marjorie, though she could barely read herself, understood the importance of learning. She arranged for Isaac to attend the small dame school in nearby Skillington, where children learned their letters and numbers. But Isaac quickly outgrew what the local school could offer. His hunger for knowledge was like a quiet fire that could not be quenched. He would practice his letters by the light of tallow candles, copying out passages from the few books in the house until his fingers were stained with ink. The long summer days of Isaac's childhood were filled with quiet discoveries. While other children played tag or rolled hoops down the village lanes, Isaac preferred to lie in the meadows surrounding Woolsthorpe, watching the intricate societies of ants, observing how water striders moved across the surface of farm ponds without breaking through. He would return home with his pockets full of interesting stones, pressed flowers, or unusual insects, each one a small mystery to be examined and understood. The apple orchard at Woolsthorpe became Isaac's favorite thinking place. There was one particular tree, later to become famous throughout the world, where he would often sit in contemplation. Even as a child, he seemed to sense that this ancient tree, with its gnarled branches and sweet fruit, held some special significance. He would sit beneath its canopy for hours, sometimes reading, sometimes just thinking, always observing the way apples hung from branches, the way they fell when ripe, the way everything in nature seemed to follow invisible rules. In 1653, when Isaac was 10 years old, another change came to his quiet world. His stepfather died, and his mother returned to Woolsthorpe with 3 new children, Isaac's half-siblings. Though he was glad to see Hannah again, Isaac had grown accustomed to the peaceful solitude of life with his grandmother. The house suddenly felt crowded and noisy. After much discussion between the adults, it was decided that Isaac should be sent away to school, to the King's School in Grantham, some 7 miles away.
Chapter 3. The Scholar's Awakening. The King's School in Grantham was a world away from the quiet countryside of Woolsthorpe. Founded by King Edward VI, it was a place where the sons of merchants, clergy, and minor gentry came to learn Latin, Greek, and the fundamentals of a classical education. Isaac, now 12 years old, walked through its stone archways, feeling both excited and overwhelmed. The building itself spoke of centuries of learning, its walls echoing with the voices of generations of students. At first, Isaac struggled to find his place among his classmates. Many of them came from wealthier families and had received better early education. They could recite Latin poetry, while Isaac was still mastering basic grammar. But his landlady, Mrs. Clark, who provided boarding for several of the schoolboys, noticed something special about the quiet lad from Woolsthorpe. While other boys would rush through their evening studies to play games or cause mischief, Isaac would sit by the window well into the night, working by candlelight until he had mastered every lesson. Mrs. Clark's house became Isaac's second home. In her warm kitchen, she would serve him simple meals of bread, cheese, and ale, while listening to his excited descriptions of what he had learned that day. She encouraged his curious nature, even when he asked endless questions about why bread rose, how her spinning wheel worked, or what made the colors in soap bubbles. Her kindness provided the emotional foundation that allowed his brilliant mind to flourish. As Isaac's confidence grew, so did his reputation as the school's most ingenious student. He began creating mechanical devices, sundials, water clocks, and even a small windmill that actually ground grain. His fellow students, initially dismissive of the quiet country boy, began to seek him out when they needed help with difficult problems. Isaac found joy in these moments of teaching and sharing, discovering that explaining concepts to others helped him understand them even more deeply. Mrs. Clark's house also had something precious, a small library left by her late husband, an apothecary. Isaac devoured these books, works on mathematics, natural philosophy, and even some volumes on what was then called natural magic, early investigations into optics, mechanics, and chemistry. He would copy diagrams into his own notebooks, creating beautiful illustrations of geometric principles and mechanical devices. His artistic skills, inherited perhaps from his mother's side, served his scientific curiosity well. In 1659, when Isaac was 16 and thriving in his studies, another summons came from home. His mother, now managing the family farm alone, needed her eldest son to return and learn the business of agriculture and estate management. The headmaster, Mr. Stokes, tried to persuade her otherwise. Isaac was by far his most promising student, clearly destined for university. But Hannah Newton was practical above all. She needed help with the farm, and Isaac was her son. And so, reluctantly, Isaac packed his few belongings and walked the familiar road back to Woolsthorpe.
Chapter 4. The Reluctant Farmer. Isaac's return to farming life was like asking a bird to swim or a fish to climb trees. Every morning, his mother would send him out to tend the sheep, repair fences, or supervise the apple harvest. But Isaac's mind remained far from these earthly tasks. He would set out with the best intentions, but inevitably find himself distracted by some natural phenomenon, the formation of clouds, the behavior of light through morning mist, or mathematical patterns in the arrangement of stones. The neighbors began to whisper about Hannah Newton's strange son. They would find him sitting under an apple tree, deep in a book,
while his sheep had wandered miles away into other people's fields. Once, he was sent to Grantham Market to sell grain and buy supplies. He became so absorbed in a mathematical problem that he forgot about the grain entirely, walking home empty-handed, except for a book he had purchased from a traveling scholar. Hannah grew increasingly frustrated with her eldest son's impracticality, but she was also beginning to understand that Isaac was simply not meant for the life of a farmer. In the evenings, she would find him in his room, surrounded by papers covered in strange symbols and diagrams. Sometimes she would hear him talking to himself, working through problems aloud. She could not understand what occupied his mind so completely, but she could see the passion burning in his eyes. During this period of supposed farming apprenticeship, Isaac made his first serious investigations into what would later become his groundbreaking work on optics. He noticed how morning dew created perfect spherical lenses on spiderwebs, how sunlight passing through these natural prisms created tiny rainbows. He began experimenting with pieces of glass, holding them up to sunlight, and studying how white light could be separated into its component colors. Salvation came in the form of Isaac's uncle, William Ayscough, who had attended Cambridge University himself. During a visit to Woolsthorpe, he observed his nephew's obvious misery and complete incompetence as a farmer. William spoke long and earnestly with Hannah, explaining that Isaac possessed a rare intellectual gift that should not be wasted on agricultural pursuits. He painted a picture of Isaac at Cambridge, among fellow scholars, finally in his proper element. After much deliberation, Hannah finally agreed to send Isaac to university. The family could afford it, just barely, and perhaps it was better than having a son who let sheep wander into neighbors' fields while he contemplated the stars. In June 1661, Isaac began preparing for his entrance to Trinity College, Cambridge. For the first time in months, his mother saw genuine happiness in her son's eyes as he packed his trunk with the few precious books he owned.
Chapter 5. Cambridge and the Garden of Knowledge. Trinity College, Cambridge in 1661 was like stepping into a living cathedral of learning. The ancient stone courts, the magnificent library, the chapel with its soaring arches, all spoke of centuries dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge. Isaac walked through the great gate, feeling both humble and excited. He was now a Caesar, a student who worked as a servant to pay for his education, waiting tables and cleaning rooms for wealthier students. Isaac's life as a Caesar was humble but not unhappy. His small chamber in Trinity was Spartanly furnished, a narrow bed, a wooden chest, a table and chair, but it was his own space, where he could think and study without interruption. He would wake before dawn to attend to his duties, lighting fires in the rooms of gentlemen students, serving them their meals, keeping their chambers clean. But these tasks were performed with a light heart, for they bought him access to something priceless, the university's vast libraries and the company of learned men. The Trinity College Library became Isaac's second home. Here were books he had only dreamed of seeing, works by ancient mathematicians, natural philosophers, and astronomers. He discovered the writings of Galileo, the geometric principles of Euclid, the revolutionary ideas of Copernicus. But more importantly, he began to encounter the cutting-edge work of contemporary thinkers like René Descartes, whose new mathematical approaches would profoundly influence Isaac's own developing methods. In his second year, Isaac was assigned a roommate who would become his lifelong friend, John Wickens, the son of a Yorkshire clergyman. Unlike many of the gentleman students who treated Caesars as mere servants, John recognized Isaac's exceptional abilities and treated him as an intellectual equal. They would study together late into the night, John helping Isaac with classical languages, while Isaac shared his growing insights into mathematics and natural philosophy. By his third year, Isaac's reputation as a brilliant student had spread throughout Trinity. Professors began to notice this quiet young man who asked probing questions and seemed to understand mathematical concepts almost intuitively. He began conducting his own experiments, particularly with light and optics, using simple equipment he made himself. Word spread of the Caesar who could split sunlight into rainbow colors and then recombine those colors back into white light. Isaac's notebooks from this period reveal a mind working at extraordinary speed and depth. He was not merely learning mathematics, he was reinventing it, developing new methods that went beyond what his professors could teach. His work on what would later be called calculus began during these Cambridge years, born from his attempts to solve problems about motion, curves, and rates of change. Late at night, by flickering candlelight, he was laying the mathematical foundations that would support the scientific revolution. In the spring of 1665, just as Isaac was finding his stride at Cambridge, disturbing news began to filter in from London. Cases of plague were increasing in the capital city, and there were fears that the disease might spread to the university towns. The college authorities faced a difficult decision. Should they continue normal operations and risk their students' health, or send everyone home until the danger passed? By midsummer, the decision was made for them. The plague had indeed reached Cambridge, and the university would close indefinitely.
Chapter 6. The Miracle Years Began. The journey back to Woolsthorpe in the summer of 1665 might have seemed like a step backward for any other young scholar, but for Isaac Newton, it marked the beginning of the most extraordinarily productive period in the history of human thought. As he walked the familiar lanes of his childhood, his mind was already racing with mathematical problems and physical questions that would occupy him during the coming months of enforced solitude. Hannah Newton had learned not to interfere too much with her son's scholarly pursuits, but even she was amazed at how quickly Isaac transformed their quiet country home into a center of scientific investigation. The parlor became his laboratory, the garden his observatory. He set up optical experiments in rooms with north-facing windows, covered tables with mathematical calculations, and filled the house with the apparatus of his investigations. It was during this period of quiet reflection at Woolsthorpe that Isaac experienced what would later be called his miracle years. 18 months during which he laid the foundations for 3 revolutionary scientific breakthroughs. The apple tree in the family orchard, where he had played as a child, now became the site of profound contemplation. Here, according to later accounts, Isaac began to wonder about the force that pulled apples downward from their branches. His work on optics during these months revolutionized humanity's understanding of light and color. Isaac discovered that white light was not pure and simple as everyone had believed, but was actually composed of all the colors of the rainbow mixed together. Using prisms he obtained from the local markets and fairs, he conducted elegant experiments that proved colors were not created by glass or other substances, but were actually separated out from light that already contained them. Simultaneously, Isaac was developing the mathematical methods that would become known as calculus, techniques for analyzing motion, change, and the areas under curves. These tools, which would prove essential for all future physics and engineering, emerged from Isaac's pure love of mathematical beauty and his desire to understand the fundamental patterns underlying natural phenomena. Night after night, he worked by candlelight, developing methods that were decades ahead of anything being done elsewhere in Europe. Perhaps most revolutionary of all was Isaac's growing understanding of motion and force. As he sat in the orchard, watching apples fall and observing the moon's steady progress across the sky, he began to suspect that the same force might be responsible for both phenomena. This insight, that the gravity pulling apples to Earth might extend far enough to hold the moon in its orbit, was so radical that Isaac kept it largely to himself, working out the mathematical implications in private. The isolation imposed by the plague, which might have been devastating for a more social person, proved perfect for Isaac's contemplative genius. With no lectures to attend, no social obligations to meet, no distractions from university life, he could follow his thoughts wherever they led. The quiet rhythms of country life, the changing seasons, the cycle of days and nights, the eternal patterns of sun, moon, and stars provided the perfect backdrop for contemplating the eternal laws that governed all motion and change.
Chapter 7. Return to Cambridge and Recognition. When Cambridge reopened in 1667, Isaac Newton returned as a profoundly changed scholar. The quiet sizar who had left 2 years earlier now carried with him revolutionary discoveries in 3 separate fields of knowledge. But in his characteristic manner, Isaac revealed his achievements gradually, almost reluctantly. He was more interested in understanding truth than in gaining recognition, more excited by the next problem than by celebrating solutions to previous ones. Isaac's first task was to organize the incredible body of work he had produced during his time at Woolsthorpe. His notebooks contained discoveries that individually would have made any scholar's reputation. Together, they represented a new understanding of the natural world so profound that even Isaac sometimes seemed amazed at what his mind had produced. His friend John Wickens helped him arrange these precious manuscripts, marveling at their density and complexity. Professor Isaac Barrow, the Lucasian professor of mathematics at Cambridge, was among the first to recognize the true magnitude of Isaac's achievements. When Isaac shyly showed him some of his mathematical work, Barrow realized immediately that his student had developed techniques that went far beyond anything currently known. The relationship between teacher and pupil began to reverse, as Barrow found himself learning from the young man he had initially taught. Isaac spent long hours in the Trinity Library, not just reading, but comparing his own discoveries with the works of other mathematicians and natural philosophers. He was beginning to understand that his insights into motion, optics, and mathematics were not merely personal achievements, but contributions to humanity's growing understanding of the universe. Yet he remained hesitant to publish, always feeling that his work needed further refinement, further proof, further development. In 1668, Isaac received his Master's of Arts degree from Cambridge. The ceremony, held in Trinity's beautiful chapel, marked his formal transition from student to scholar. But for Isaac, this was merely an administrative milestone. His real achievement was the growing recognition among Cambridge's most distinguished faculty that they had in their midst an extraordinary mind of power. Isaac was elected as a minor fellow of Trinity College, a position that provided him with a small income and, more importantly, the freedom to pursue his research without the distractions of teaching or administrative duties.
In the combination room, where fellows gathered for their evening meals and conversations, Isaac began to share some of his ideas with his colleagues. Though he spoke quietly and modestly, the depth of his insights gradually became apparent to those who listened carefully. In 1669, an extraordinary event occurred that had no precedent in the history of Cambridge University. Professor Isaac Barrow, at the height of his own distinguished career, made the unprecedented decision to resign from the Lucasian Professorship of Mathematics, one of the most prestigious academic positions in England. His reason was simple but remarkable. He wished to clear the way for his former student, Isaac Newton, to assume the chair.
Chapter 8. The Lucasian Professor. On October 29, 1669, Isaac Newton delivered his first lecture as the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics. The lecture hall was not crowded. Advanced mathematics attracted only the most dedicated students, but those present witnessed something unprecedented. This young professor, speaking in his quiet Lincolnshire accent, was presenting mathematical concepts that existed nowhere else in the world. His lectures on optics, delivered over the following years, contained discoveries that would not be fully appreciated for decades. The professorship provided Isaac with both the resources and the obligation to demonstrate his discoveries through public lectures and practical inventions. One of his most remarkable early achievements was the construction of a reflecting telescope, the first successful example ever built. Working with his own hands, grinding mirrors and adjusting mechanisms with infinite patience, Isaac created an instrument that could show the moons of Jupiter with unprecedented clarity. When Isaac's reflecting telescope was presented to the Royal Society of London in 1671, it created a sensation among England's leading natural philosophers. Here was a practical demonstration of theoretical knowledge, an instrument that worked better than anything previously available based on entirely new principles of optical design. The telescope was so impressive that it earned Isaac immediate election to the Royal Society, the most prestigious scientific organization in the world. Isaac's election to the Royal Society came with the expectation that he would share his discoveries with the scientific community. Reluctantly, he began preparing his first scientific paper, a careful exposition of his discoveries about light and color. The paper described his experiments with prisms, his proof that white light contained all colors, and his new understanding of how telescopes and other optical instruments actually worked. When Isaac's paper on optics was published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in 1672, it sparked intense debate throughout Europe. Some natural philosophers accepted his revolutionary ideas immediately, while others challenged his conclusions or proposed alternative theories. Isaac found this scientific controversy both intellectually stimulating and personally exhausting. He had hoped that clear experimental evidence would convince everyone, but he was learning that even in science, new ideas faced resistance. Despite the controversies surrounding his published work, Isaac continued his private investigations with undiminished enthusiasm. His Cambridge chambers and the small garden behind them became an increasingly sophisticated laboratory. He designed new experiments to answer his critics and to explore questions that his initial discoveries had raised. Each experiment was planned with mathematical precision and executed with the patience of a master craftsman. The demands of professorship, lecturing, corresponding with other scholars, defending his theories against criticism, sometimes wearied Isaac's contemplative nature. He would often take long, solitary walks through the Cambridge courts and gardens, using the rhythm of walking to clear his mind and organize his thoughts.
These quiet interludes away from books and instruments often proved as productive as hours spent in formal study.
Chapter 9. The Mysterious Alchemist. While Isaac Newton's public reputation rested on his mathematical and optical discoveries, he harbored a secret passion that consumed much of his private time: the ancient art of alchemy. In a carefully concealed laboratory beneath his Cambridge rooms, Isaac pursued experiments that sought to unlock the deepest secrets of matter itself. By candlelight and lamplight, he heated metals, distilled essences, and searched for the fundamental principles that govern the transformation of substances. Isaac's alchemical studies were not the superstitious gold-making of popular imagination, but a serious scientific investigation into the nature of matter. He collected and copied thousands of pages of alchemical texts, studying the works of medieval and Renaissance masters with the same intensity he brought to mathematics. His notebooks from this period, written in a careful hand, record hundreds of experiments designed to understand how substances could be transformed and purified. The alchemical work required different skills from mathematics or optics: patience with slow processes, sensitivity to subtle changes, and an intuitive feel for the behavior of matter under heat and chemical action. Isaac approached these challenges with characteristic thoroughness, building his own furnaces, preparing his own reagents, and keeping detailed records of every experiment. He worked mostly at night, when curious eyes were less likely to discover his secret investigations. Few of Isaac's contemporaries suspected the extent of his alchemical interests. During the day, he was the distinguished Lucasian professor, delivering lectures on mathematics and corresponding with Europe's leading natural philosophers. But in the hours after midnight, he became a solitary investigator of nature's most hidden secrets. This double life required careful management. Alchemical apparatus had to be concealed. Experiments had to be conducted when the college was asleep, and research notes had to be hidden from curious colleagues. Isaac's alchemical investigations were not separate from his legitimate scientific work, but deeply connected to it. His studies of metals and their properties informed his understanding of optics and mechanics. His investigations into the forces that held matter together would eventually contribute to his revolutionary insights about gravity and motion. The patient, methodical approach he developed in alchemical experiments strengthened his skills as an experimental scientist. The secrecy surrounding Isaac's alchemical work was necessary for both practical and philosophical reasons. Alchemy occupied a difficult position in 17th-century academic life, not quite respectable enough for public acknowledgement, but not entirely disreputable either. Many distinguished scholars pursued alchemical studies privately, but few admitted it openly. Isaac developed an elaborate system of codes and symbols to record his experiments, ensuring that his work would remain hidden from casual observers. As dawn approached after a night of alchemical experiments, Isaac would carefully clean and store his apparatus, removing all traces of his secret work before the college community began to stir. Then, after perhaps an hour of sleep, he would emerge as the respectable professor, ready to deliver lectures or meet with colleagues. This demanding schedule, pursuing two entirely different types of investigation simultaneously, would have exhausted most people, but Isaac seemed energized by the intellectual challenges of his double life.
Chapter 10. The Great Work Takes Shape. In August 1684, Isaac's quiet academic routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor.
Edmund Halley, the brilliant young astronomer, had traveled from London to Cambridge with a specific question that was troubling the most advanced mathematicians in Europe. What curve would a planet follow if it were attracted to the sun by a force that decreased as the square of the distance? Isaac's immediate answer, an ellipse, astonished Halley, who had been struggling with this problem for months. When Halley asked to see the proof of this remarkable claim, Isaac began searching through his old papers from the plague years at Woolsthorpe. Somewhere among his notebooks were the calculations that had first convinced him that the same force pulling apples to Earth might also keep planets in their orbits. But in the nearly 20 years since those discoveries, Isaac had filled thousands of pages with new research, and the crucial papers proved elusive. Unable to immediately locate his original proof, Isaac promised to work out the problem again and send the results to Halley. But as he began this apparently simple task, Isaac realized that he needed to develop his ideas much more systematically. What had begun as a straightforward mathematical demonstration was growing into something far more ambitious, a complete mathematical description of motion and force throughout the entire universe. For the next 18 months, Isaac worked with an intensity that amazed even his closest friends. He seemed to eat only when food was placed directly in front of him, to sleep only when exhaustion made further work impossible. His servant found him in the mornings exactly as he had been left the night before, still working at his desk, surrounded by papers covered with diagrams and equations. The great work that would become the Principia Mathematica was consuming all Isaac's considerable intellectual energy. Isaac's chambers gradually transformed into a kind of workshop for mathematical physics. Every available surface was covered with diagrams showing the motion of planets, the paths of comets, the behavior of pendulums, and the flow of fluids. He was not merely solving individual problems, but creating an entirely new way of understanding how mathematics could describe the physical world. Each breakthrough led to new questions. Each solution revealed new problems to be solved. As portions of Isaac's work reached the Royal Society through Halley's reports, the scientific community began to realize that something extraordinary was being created at Cambridge. The mathematics was so advanced that only a handful of scholars in Europe could follow Isaac's reasoning, but the implications were staggering. Here was a single set of mathematical laws that could explain everything from the fall of an apple to the motion of the moon, from the rhythm of tides to the return of comets. By 1687, Isaac had completed his masterwork, the Philosophiæ Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. The 3 volumes contained the most comprehensive and mathematically sophisticated description of the physical universe ever attempted. But even as he prepared the final manuscript for publication, Isaac seemed almost reluctant to release his work to the world. He had spent so many years in private investigation that the prospect of public scrutiny was somewhat daunting.
Chapter 11. The Master of the Mint. In 1696, Isaac's life took an unexpected turn when he was appointed Warden of the Royal Mint. This position, which carried significant government responsibility and an excellent salary, required him to leave his quiet academic life at Cambridge and move to London. The Royal Mint housed within the ancient Tower of London, was responsible for producing all of England's currency, a task that involved not only technical expertise, but also constant vigilance against counterfeiters and criminals. Isaac approached his duties at the Mint with the same methodical thoroughness he had brought to mathematics and natural philosophy. He personally examined thousands of coins, checking their weight, purity, and design. He studied the technical processes of coin production, learning about metallurgy, die cutting, and the prevention of forgery. What might have been routine administrative work became, under Isaac's management, an exercise in applied science and precision engineering. Perhaps most remarkably, Isaac personally led investigations into counterfeiting rings that threatened England's monetary system. Using the same analytical skills that had unlocked the secrets of planetary motion, he traced the distribution of false coins, identified the techniques used by forgers, and built legal cases that led to numerous prosecutions. His work at the Mint demonstrated that scientific method could be applied successfully to practical problems of commerce and law enforcement. Isaac's success at the Mint led to his promotion to Master of the Mint in 1699, a position he would hold until his death. His London house became a gathering place for England's intellectual and political elite. The quiet scholar who had once worked in isolation at Cambridge was now a prominent public figure, consulted on matters ranging from currency reform to international scientific disputes. Yet despite his public responsibilities, Isaac continued his private research, maintaining correspondence with scholars throughout Europe. During his London years, Isaac devoted increasing attention to theological and historical studies. He wrote extensively about biblical chronology, attempting to establish precise dates for events in ancient history. His approach to these subjects was as rigorous as his approach to mathematics and natural philosophy. He studied original sources, compared different accounts, and applied logical analysis to problems that had puzzled scholars for centuries. Though these works were not published during his lifetime, they represented thousands of hours of careful investigation. Despite the demands of his position at the Mint, Isaac maintained the regular habits that had sustained him throughout his life. He took daily walks in London's parks, using these quiet periods to think through problems and organize his ideas. The city's energy and noise were very different from the contemplative atmosphere at Cambridge, but Isaac adapted to his new environment while preserving the inner quiet that had always been essential to his work. In 1703, Isaac was elected president of the Royal Society, a position he would hold for the remaining 24 years of his life. Under his leadership, the Society became increasingly influential in British intellectual life. Isaac used his position to promote experimental science, to settle disputes between competing theories, and to maintain England's growing reputation as a center of scientific innovation. His presidential addresses, delivered with quiet authority, helped shape the direction of scientific research throughout Europe.
Chapter 12. The Sage of Science. In 1704, Isaac finally published his long-awaited work on optics, the culmination of nearly 40 years of investigation into the nature of light and color. Unlike the mathematical complexity of the Principia, the optics was written in English and presented his discoveries through detailed descriptions of experiments that readers could verify for themselves. The book revealed the full scope of Isaac's optical investigations, from his early work with prisms to his most recent theories about the fundamental nature of light. Isaac's later years were marked by an unfortunate controversy that would overshadow many of his achievements.
Gottfried Leibniz, the brilliant German mathematician, had independently developed mathematical methods very similar to Isaac's calculus. The question of who deserved priority for this crucial discovery led to a bitter dispute that divided the European mathematical community. Isaac, normally so careful to avoid controversy, found himself drawn into increasingly acrimonious exchanges with Leibniz and his supporters. Despite the distractions of controversy, Isaac continued to refine and expand his scientific work. New editions of the Principia appeared in 1713 and 1726, each containing significant improvements and additions. Isaac revised unclear passages, added new mathematical demonstrations, and incorporated discoveries made by other scientists working with his methods. His commitment to accuracy and completeness remained as strong in old age as it had been in his youth. As Isaac entered his 70s, he became increasingly sought after as a mentor and advisor to younger scientists. His London house received a steady stream of visitors: mathematicians seeking help with difficult problems, natural philosophers wanting to discuss their theories, and ambitious young men hoping to learn from the master himself. Isaac, despite his natural reserve, seemed to enjoy these interactions, taking pleasure in seeing his methods applied to new problems and extended in new directions. Throughout his London years, Isaac maintained a small garden where he could observe the natural phenomena that had first sparked his scientific curiosity. Even in old age, he would spend quiet mornings watching the play of light through leaves, observing the behavior of insects, and noting the subtle changes that marked the passage of seasons. These moments of direct contact with nature remained essential to his well-being, connecting him to the wonder and curiosity that had driven all his investigations. Isaac's later years extended far beyond natural philosophy. He wrote extensively about biblical prophecy, attempting to decode the symbolic language of the Book of Revelation. He worked on establishing precise chronologies for ancient history, using astronomical calculations to date historical events. These investigations, while very different from his scientific work, displayed the same qualities of careful analysis and systematic thinking that had characterized all his intellectual endeavors. By 1720, Isaac Newton was recognized throughout Europe as perhaps the greatest scientist who had ever lived. Universities competed to offer him honorary degrees, royal academies elected him to membership, and monarchs sought his advice on scientific and technical matters. Isaac seemed relatively unmoved by these honors, accepting them graciously, but without the excitement they might have generated in a younger man. His satisfaction came not from external recognition, but from the knowledge that he had contributed to humanity's understanding of the natural world.
Chapter 13. The Universal Philosopher. In his 80th year, Isaac Newton had become something unprecedented in human history, a man whose discoveries had fundamentally changed how people understood their place in the universe. The mathematical laws he had formulated described everything from the motion of planets to the behavior of tides, from the path of a thrown stone to the orbit of a comet. Yet Isaac himself seemed most struck not by what he had discovered, but by how much remained unknown. As Isaac entered his final years, he began the careful process of organizing his papers and manuscripts. The sheer volume of his written work was staggering, thousands of pages covering every subject that had interested him over more than 60 years of investigation. He sorted through notebooks from his Cambridge days, alchemical experiments from his middle years, and theological investigations from his time in London, trying to decide what should be preserved for future scholars. Isaac's household in London was managed by his niece, Catherine Barton, whose intelligence and charm had made her a favorite in London society. Catherine provided Isaac with the domestic tranquility he needed for his work, while also serving as his hostess when distinguished visitors came to call. Their relationship was marked by genuine affection and mutual respect. Catherine understood her uncle's need for quiet and routine, while Isaac appreciated her practical wisdom and lively conversation. Despite his advanced age, Isaac continued to attend meetings of the Royal Society, where his presence was regarded with something approaching reverence. Younger scientists would gather around him, hoping to hear his thoughts on their latest discoveries or to gain insight into problems they were investigating. Isaac's responses were always measured and thoughtful, reflecting the depth of experience that came from a lifetime spent in scientific investigation. In the quiet hours of his days, Isaac often returned to the books that had first inspired his love of learning. He would read again from the works of ancient mathematicians, from theological treatises that had guided his religious thinking, and from the natural philosophers whose ideas had sparked his own investigations. These familiar texts provided both intellectual stimulation and emotional comfort, connecting him to the traditions of learning he had helped to advance. On clear evenings, Isaac would often stand at his window and look up at the stars that had fascinated him since childhood. The same celestial bodies that had puzzled ancient astronomers now moved according to mathematical laws that he had discovered and formulated. Yet rather than feeling satisfied with his achievements, Isaac seemed most aware of the infinite complexity and beauty of the universe that his work had only begun to explore. Even in his 80s, Isaac continued to work on revisions and improvements to his published works. The third edition of the Principia, published in 1726, contained changes and additions that reflected his continuing efforts to perfect his presentation of universal gravitation. His commitment to accuracy and completeness remained as strong as ever, driven by his belief that natural philosophy should be held to the highest possible standards of precision and clarity. Isaac's reputation had spread far beyond England's borders, and his London house regularly received visitors from throughout Europe. French mathematicians, German natural philosophers, and Italian scientists would make the journey to London specifically to meet the man whose work had revolutionized their understanding of the physical world.
Chapter 14. The Gentle Decline. As 1725 gave way to 1726, those closest to Isaac began to notice subtle changes in his health and energy. The man who had once worked through entire nights without fatigue now found himself tiring more easily. His morning walks became shorter, his evening studies less intense. Yet his mind remained as sharp as ever, and his interest in scientific questions showed no signs of diminishing. He adapted to his physical limitations with the same methodical approach he had always brought to problems. The rhythm of Isaac's days became gentler and more contemplative. He would spend long hours in his favorite chair by the fire, reading, or simply thinking about the great questions that had occupied his mind throughout his life. His housekeeper would bring him tea and simple meals which he would accept with quiet gratitude. These peaceful moments seemed to provide him with a different kind of satisfaction from the intense intellectual work that had defined his earlier years. Sensing that his time was growing short, Isaac devoted considerable effort to ensuring that his most important work would survive him. He worked with secretaries and assistants to create clean copies of crucial manuscripts, to organize his correspondence with other scientists, and to prepare notes that would help future scholars understand his methods and discoveries. This work of preservation seemed to give him particular satisfaction, as if he were ensuring that the knowledge he had gained would continue to benefit humanity. During his final months, Isaac received visits from many of the scientists and mathematicians who had worked with him over the years. These gatherings had a special quality. They were not somber farewells, but rather quiet celebrations of shared discoveries and intellectual friendship. The conversations often turned to scientific questions, as Isaac and his visitors discussed recent developments in mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. Isaac's final appearances at the Royal Society were marked with a special reverence from the younger fellows. They understood that they were witnessing the end of an era, that when Isaac Newton was gone, they would lose their direct connection to the scientific revolution that had transformed human understanding of the natural world. Yet Isaac seemed more interested in encouraging their future work than in dwelling on his past achievements. On clear winter nights, Isaac would still occasionally set up his telescope by the window of his study. The instrument he had designed and built so many years earlier still functioned perfectly, bringing the Moon's craters and Jupiter's moons into sharp focus. As he looked through the eyepiece, Isaac seemed to find comfort in these celestial companions that had occupied so much of his thinking. The universe continued its ancient dance according to the mathematical laws he had discovered, providing a sense of permanence and order that transcended individual human lives. Even as his strength declined, Isaac maintained his correspondence with scientists throughout Europe. His letters from this period, though written in an increasingly unsteady hand, showed that his mind remained fully engaged with scientific questions. He offered advice to younger mathematicians, suggested improvements to experimental procedures, and continued to think about unsolved problems in optics and mechanics. For Isaac, intellectual engagement seemed to be as essential as breathing. The spring of 1727 brought mild weather that allowed Isaac to take what would be his final walks in the small garden behind his London house. He moved slowly now, often stopping to rest on a bench or to examine some interesting natural phenomenon. A spider's web covered with morning dew, the precise geometry of flower petals, the behavior of light through new leaves. These simple wonders still captured his attention with the same intensity they had aroused in the curious child from Woolsthorpe.
Chapter 15. The Eternal Rest. In early March 1727, Isaac's health began to decline more rapidly. What had been a gradual weakening suddenly became more serious, and it became clear that his long journey through life was approaching its end. Yet Isaac faced this final challenge with the same calm rationality he had brought to all the great questions of his life. He spoke quietly with his doctors, arranged his final affairs with characteristic thoroughness, and spent peaceful hours with his niece Catherine and closest friends. In his final conscious days, Isaac was surrounded by the books and papers that had been his lifelong companions, the manuscript of the Principia, his notebooks on optics,
his theological investigations, and his vast correspondence with scholars throughout Europe all represented different facets of his ceaseless quest to understand the workings of the natural world. Looking at these accumulated treasures of knowledge, Isaac could feel satisfied that his life had been well spent in service to truth and understanding. As a man who had spent considerable time studying theology and biblical prophecy, Isaac approached the prospect of death with deep spiritual reflection. He spoke with clergy about matters of faith and redemption, finding comfort in beliefs that had sustained him throughout his life. His investigations into natural philosophy had never shaken his conviction that the universe was the creation of a divine intelligence. Indeed, his discoveries had only deepened his sense of awe at the mathematical beauty underlying all natural phenomena. On March 20th, 1727, in the early hours of the morning, Isaac Newton died peacefully in his sleep. He was 84 years old and had lived to see his revolutionary discoveries accepted and celebrated throughout the civilized world. His passing was gentle, without struggle or apparent pain, a fitting end for a man who had devoted his life to understanding the harmonious mathematical principles that govern all natural processes. News of Isaac's death spread quickly through London and then throughout Europe. In coffee houses and universities, in royal courts and scientific societies, people paused to reflect on the extraordinary life that had just ended. Kings and commoners alike understood that they had lost not just a great scientist, but a man whose discoveries had fundamentally changed human understanding of the universe. The quiet boy from Woolsthorpe Manor had become one of the most important figures in the history of human thought. Isaac's funeral was conducted with honors befitting one of England's greatest sons. His coffin, draped in black velvet, was carried through the streets of London by some of the most distinguished men in the realm. Scientists, government officials, aristocrats, and common citizens lined the route to pay their final respects. The procession made its way slowly toward Westminster Abbey, where Isaac would be laid to rest among England's most honored dead. Isaac Newton was buried in Westminster Abbey with unprecedented honors for a man of science. His tomb, adorned with allegorical figures representing his great discoveries, bore an inscription that captured the magnitude of his achievements. "Here lies that which was mortal of Isaac Newton." The monument served not just as a memorial to one man's life, but as a testament to the power of human reason to unlock the secrets of the natural world. Back at Woolsthorpe Manor, the apple tree beneath which Isaac had first contemplated the force of gravity continued its ancient cycle of seasons. Each spring brought new blossoms, each autumn brought new fruit. The tree stood as a living symbol of the connection between the ordinary phenomena of daily life and the profound mathematical laws that Isaac had discovered. Visitors would come to sit beneath its branches, thinking about the moment when a falling apple had sparked one of the greatest insights in human history. Conclusion: the infinite ocean of truth. And so we come to the end of our gentle journey through the life of Isaac Newton, that quiet genius who transformed our understanding of the universe while living much of his life in peaceful solitude. From the tiny premature baby who might not have survived his first winter, to the elderly sage whose discoveries had illuminated the workings of the cosmos, Isaac's story reminds us that the greatest achievements often come from patient observation, careful thought, and an endless sense of wonder about the world around us. Isaac once wrote that he felt like a child playing on the seashore, finding occasionally a smoother pebble or prettier shell than usual, while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before him. This humble perspective, from a man who had achieved more than perhaps any scientist before or since, captures something essential about the nature of human knowledge and the endless quest to understand our place in the universe. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you might think of those same stars that fascinated the young Isaac Newton as he lay in the fields of Woolsthorpe so many centuries ago. They continue their stately dance across the heavens, following the mathematical principles he discovered, reminding us that we live in a universe of extraordinary beauty and order. The questions that drove Isaac's lifelong quest for understanding — why do things fall? How does light behave? What forces shape the cosmos? — continued to inspire new generations of curious minds. Let the peaceful rhythm of the natural world, the same rhythm that Newton observed and came to understand so deeply, carry you gently into restful sleep. Rest well, knowing that somewhere someone is still looking up at those stars, still asking questions, still adding to the great treasury of human knowledge that Isaac Newton helped to establish. The quest for understanding continues, as eternal and beautiful as the stars themselves.